Jason Voorhees, one of the most long-awaited and requested chapters, has finally made their way into the fog, and thus into the game of Dead by Daylight. And so I've decided to take it upon myself to play 13 games of this iconic slasher. So hello, slimes and non-slimes alike, Rosie here. And I played 13 games of Jason, and this is what happened. Loading into Game 1, I'm sure you already know how Jason's powers work, so I'm not going to bore you with that. However, this game was my first time actually playing around with him, as I do not have the opportunity to play the PTP. That being said, I did take one look at the Dirty Money add-on that he had and decided to try and make a build around it. So, you can see that I'm running Lethal Pursuer, Nowhere to Hide, Pop Goes the Weasel, and Brutal Strength to try and make the most use out of the Dirty Money add-on. Which, if you don't know, gives you 2 tokens every time a survivors complete a generator. For each token that you have, once you kick a pallet, vault a window, or break a breakable wall, you will consume a token and gain 1 spike, which you can then use to throw at survivors. Yada yada yada. You all know what this does at this point. Jason's been out for a few weeks. But this was my first game with Jason, and unfortunately, I miss a lot. However, that is simply par for the course when you are learning a new killer, especially when it comes to new ranged killers. And while I do manage to land a few good shots here and there, I unfortunately lose too many generators too quickly, and eventually am forced to try and tunnel out the gate, at which point I'm down to 1 generator, miss a crucial shot, and all of the survivors are able to make it out and teabag me on their way. Alright, that first match was a bit quick, so loading into Game 2, we are loading into the Blood Lodge, and I just want to quickly go over what exactly, the whole point of this video is. Learning a new killer can be extremely difficult and can take plenty of time to master, and so I wanted to challenge myself to see how much I can learn about Jason in just a few short games. So naturally I went with 13 because, I think I'm clever. I specifically wanted to do this with Jason, as Friday the 13th is one of my favorite horror films of all time, and is basically one of 3 horror franchises I actually care enough to see it come to Dead by Daylight. The other 2 being FNAF and Predator. And out of those 3, only Predator has yet to arrive, so here's hoping that Predator does arrive at some point. But, that being said, Jason is just widely one of my favorite characters of all time, so seeing him come to Dead by Daylight was severely disappointing, for many reasons I'll get into later. But focusing on Game 2, I swapped out a bit of the build, switching out Nowhere to Hide and Lethal Pursuer in exchange for No Hold Bar and Eruption, in the hopes to slow down the game a bit more than what the previous game had enabled. Unfortunately, this would backfire on me, as the Carlos was able to set up a Weaving Spiders invocation, which made it so that all generators had instantly 10% progress permanently removed for the entire remainder of the match. This made the game far closer than what it should have been, especially considering that David just disconnects, and also has no mither. What? Yeah, so needless to say, this match was a bit on the weirder end. Several chases go on much longer than I would have liked, and primarily due to high wall loops making it damn near impossible to use your power, and additionally, I only really win because I managed to find an early kill on the Carlos, who I was able to land mostly due to the inbuilt Mori. With one survivor being dead and the other being a bot, both the V and Jane gave up, and I was able to get a pretty clean 4K, although I did manage to land a pretty neat double tap. So like I said, I was able to pretty much wrap up the game at 3 generators pretty easily, so I might as well go ahead and talk about one other thing in Game 2 while I wrap everything up. One of the other reasons why I wanted to do this challenge was so that I could go ahead and track things such as what maps I got, what my overall kill rate was, and what perks the survivors most commonly used. Primarily because I really like doing numbers, and secondly, to see what survivors really do and what the meta looks like on the survivor end, and to see if it really is as stale as many people make it out to be. But we will be moving on to Game 3. For Game 3, we load into the Dead Dog Saloon, widely considered to be one of the very few maps that are largely killer-sided so long as you avoid main building. That being said, Jason has a really fun interaction with main building, especially on Dead Dog, where he's able to teleport to the second story at will. Which, although interesting, isn't really something that occurs a lot. I think I do it once for the entire match. No, the main point of this game is that I change up the build. Did you expect me to stay with the same build for all 13 games? That kind of defeats the point of the challenge. This build primarily uses Ruin in combination with the purple add-on Deputy's Badge. This add-on was reworked from the PTB to live to no longer show the aura of the generators when you enter your teleport, but instead makes it so that passing by generators cause them to explode and start regressing. This pairs really well with Ruin, since if survivors manage to get rid of your Ruin, no they didn't. Your power is inbuilt Ruin. This game was really fun. The build felt very strong, and a little bit of a spoiler warning, this build has a 100% win rate between the 3 games that I used it on, and would become the blueprint for the final build I would use throughout the challenge. That being said, this game was very, very laggy. As you will see, there were 2 major moments where the game just freaked out, and unfortunately, this would be an omen for what was to come. The lag aside, however, the game was very much in my control, as I managed to find a kill on the Obsession at 5 generators. From that point, the game was basically won, and it was just a matter of wrapping things up neatly. Unfortunately, the survivors did fight until the very end, and they made it very difficult for me to make it. However, it was during this time that I managed to find that Jason excels in endgame situations. Managing to close hatch on Jason is basically a guaranteed victory, as you're able to patrol the exit gates extremely easily while in power. And I managed to do exactly that, finding the Chris Redfield hiding in basement during the endgame collapse, and mooring him to secure a 4K. And move on into Game 4. Game 4 highlights possibly one of Jason's biggest strengths, and one of his biggest weaknesses in this match. Despite how quickly it is, this early on I managed to down Renato, and no one managed to save him from basement until he had hit second stage, which unfortunately led to him getting killed at 5 generators, as I was simply able to just tunnel him out with the inbuilt Mori. To which the Leon attempted to do a flashlight save on someone I was actively Moriing. This leads to me downing and hooking the Leon next, which then leads to the biggest weakness about Jason that I mentioned earlier, the anti-camp. As you just saw, he leaves super slowly, coming out of his power if he tries to even teleport to someone who recently got off of hook. While the Fang Min was able to smartly use this time to run away, Leon unfortunately stuck around, which led to me tunneling him over trying to chase his unhooker. Don't worry, he made sure to yell at me on PlayStation chat, because I was apparently tunneling him after he used life to run in a giant circle around me. Needless to say, the match pretty much ended decisively in my favor, and it was just a matter of wrapping things up. Picking up the Zarina instead of throwing down the pallet that definitely would have stunned me, Fang Min attempts to try and do a flashlight save, which results in me just putting them down and instantly turning around to guarantee the 4K, and letting us move on to game number 5. Game 5 was extremely close. In fact, it was the closest game I've had when using this build. I couldn't find a kill until I got this Fang Min at 2 generators left. However, I think this game perfectly illustrates the greatest strengths and weaknesses of Jason in Chase. And I'll go ahead and go over 2 chases in particular to demonstrate what I'm talking about. So as you can see, I'm teleporting from the shack window towards the survivors. This immediately zones them away from shack, which is an extremely powerful tile, and gives me a guaranteed M1 against the Nia. At which point the Lori tries to go ahead and take some body blocks for the Nia so I can't down her with a hook spike follow-up, to which I miss 2 shots. I go ahead and grab another spike here, and the Lori tries to slow me down a bit more by body blocking for the Nia again. Unfortunately, this results in me being able to 2-tap her with an M1 into a hook spike from range. This is how Jason is supposed to be played. You try to ambush the survivors with your teleport to get an M1 and then immediately follow up with a hook spike to down them quickly. Unfortunately, that isn't always guaranteed, as will be shown in this chase. This chase already starts off rough. Nia is already holding a check spot and I teleport to the wrong direction that I wanted. Nia is able to double back here and I'm forced to run around the long way of shack, and I can't find an angle in time as I wind up and improperly aim to hit her at the window here, forcing me to reload at the hook and walk all the way back around, at which point Nia is able to comfortably hold the check spot and I'm unable to try and hit her at the doorway here because of the locker, or the window here because of the locker again. This forces me to try and double back again, to which I just end up throwing the spike into the pallet, which allows Nia to comfortably move to a better check spot for free. This is unfortunately one of Jason's biggest weaknesses. If he's unable to get that initial ambush, he can struggle really hard against high wall loops like shack. This forces me to eventually try and reload using Omnipresent Evil, reset my haste with the teleport, and I'm just kind of forced to run her down as a 110 killer and force her to try and block window. This chase eventually ends with her stunning me at pallet and blinding me, which ends up eating nearly 1 minute and 30 seconds of literal nothing. Nia ran this loop extremely well, and I should have left her alone much sooner than I did, and unfortunately it cost me a lot of time. This is what you want to avoid while playing Jason. Regardless of that, however, I do manage to down and hook the Nia, which eventually leads to me downing and killing the Victoria with a Mori to end out Game 5 and move on to Game 6. While in Game 6, I would love to talk about how I swapped up the build to be a bit more high octane with anti-exhaustion add-ons. Unfortunately, we are on Trickster's Delusion, a map that is notoriously big and terrible for all range killers of any kind due to the constant high wall loops. Unfortunately, because of this, I end up losing a lot of time to this chase with a Lori, and in about 1.5 minutes, I end up losing 3 generators. This unfortunately forces me into the back foot and forces me to try and make a comeback during the endgame. Without the anti-camp mechanic to allow the survivors to unhook themselves during the endgame, I'm able to literally just stand in front of the survivor on hook with a spike held up and try to 2-tap anyone who tries to go for the unhook, which is exactly what happens to the Felix, which then results in his death. After hooking him, I'm able to go ahead and deal with the Gabriel, who is injured behind me, and once again put him on hook as well. This results in a major sense of deja vu, as once again the Felix goes ahead and tries to unhook the Gabriel, to which I'm able to easily double tap him for a kill. Unfortunately, with both exit gates 99 and one of them being opened, I'm unfortunately left with only the Felix to show for my efforts during the endgame. As I go ahead and take my Mori, I end Game 6 with 1 kill, with the other survivors managing to get out relatively freely. Game 7 takes us to the Lake Ornament Mine, and although it takes me a while to get my first down due to me spreading injuries early on to make use of the build, it was relatively an easy match. The build was a Terror Radius based build utilizing Unforeseen and the Cork Bulb Screw add-on to go ahead and disorient survivors where my Terror Radius is, and make it a sort of anti-heal build with the assistance of Claustrophobia as well. And while I'm not sure how much value claustrophobia got me in the end, the build was still relatively fun, and I would highly recommend using it if you want to try out a fun build for Jason. That being said, this game was largely uneventful, but there are a few key points I do want to talk about. For example, in this clip, I go ahead and teleport, the Kate clearly sees that I see her, walks around the corner, I mark this with Pop and Eruption, go around the corner, and then she uses her sprint burst to get away. This then results in her getting healed by Quentin, which then results in me downing her. Why survivors will always improperly use sprint burst so that they can show you that they have it will always baffle me. It does nothing except lose you distance and eventually will just kinda lead to your downfall. And then we have this clip, which happens shortly after. I go ahead and I find that Daryl trying to save the Kate and pick her back up, to which I simply just go ahead and pick her up. To which the Daryl tries to body block me for no reason. The hook is right there. She's not going to be able to wiggle out in time for you to actually save her. And guess what? The Daryl dies 10 seconds later because of this. The match ends relatively quickly afterwards as I go ahead and down the Laura, to which I then pick her up, to which the Kate decides to go ahead and try to land this epic flashlight save, which does nothing except get her killed and results in me getting a pretty easy 4K. Game 8 happens on the decimated Borgo, and I just want to ask you a question real quick. Do you see this snipe? Cool, here's it without the editing. Needless to say, being unable to see a damn thing this match made it very difficult for me to keep track of the survivors. This was not helped by the fact that there was a giant dead zone in the center of the map where the last 3 remaining generators were, which meant that I couldn't use my power to teleport to them and properly pressure them. This also wasn't helped even further by the fact that they were a 4-man Swift, leading to me getting 4-man outed relatively easily. Needless to say, after Game 8 I decided to adjust my brightness settings, so that's why everything is so much brighter now. However, loading into the Garden of Joy on Game 9, I was slightly optimistic, strangely enough. This is because I once again changed my build. This time, running a Scourge Hook build with Dissolution and the Iridescent Boat Motor. The idea was to avoid the same problems that I had back in Game 5. As we already went over, Jason being unable to get the ambush for the first hit makes him being able to get a 2-tap much more difficult. Iridescent Boat Motor changes that by making it so that you can use your power to get rid of windows, and Dissolution makes it easier for you to land a follow-up if you have to use your spike in order to get the first injury. The two of them pair extremely well and allow you to quickly get downs much faster, and ends up being one of my favorite perk combos on Jason going forward. And as you can see, it leads to some really quick downs. Outside of my first 2 chases being extremely quick, there's this chase where I go ahead and corner the Meg here, and she just didn't think I could hit through the fence gate. She was wrong. And then there's this chase with the Ji-Woon again, where I'm able to go ahead and hit him with the spike, showing off the strength that I was talked about earlier. If you're unable to get the ambush, use the spike to get the first hit, Dissolution to get the second. Unfortunately, if the pattern hasn't shown itself up now, I'll spell it out more plainly. The only people I was finding was the Ji-Woon and the Meg. The Claudette and Sable were basically leaving them both for dead, and in fact, held me hostage for 6 minutes after I killed them both. If you don't know, the killer is typically able to abandon the match after 5 minutes if no survivor touches a generator, which, on the first glance, is seemingly what was happening. However, at one point, someone hopped on a generator for a split second just so I wouldn't be able to abandon the match. So I guess that provides some time for me to go ahead and discuss something else. I don't blame you if you had forgotten, but way back in Game 2, I said I was severely disappointed with Jason coming into Dead by Daylight. I feel like I should clarify that I mean by how his power was implemented, not that Jason coming into Dead by Daylight was a bad thing. I really wanted Jason to come into the game, and I have been waiting a long time for him to do so. However, I am severely disappointed with what his power ended up being due to a very, very personal pet peeve. If you don't know, Jason in the Friday the 13th films is never explicitly stated nor shown that he can teleport. However, it is a widely accepted fan theory that he could, as a way to explain how he was able to cut off many of the characters in the films during various chase scenes. That being said, I was always subscribed to the idea that Jason had simply found a shortcut to cut them off, or simply sprinted due to his more athletic build. But because of how popular the teleporting Jason theory was, it began to make more and more appearances in various spin-offs, such as the Mortal Kombat game and the official Friday the 13th game. Unfortunately, nowadays, Jason is pretty synonymous with his teleport, especially with how consistent the teleport is portrayed throughout various spin-off appearances. So I can't say I'm too surprised that Dead by Daylight gave him a teleport. However, I can say I am disappointed that they gave him a teleport, and then also gave him a ranged power that is thematically fitting that would explain not giving him a teleport. If you wanted to give Jason a teleport, why not just make that his whole power, then give us a range power on top of it? The range power now just kind of feels unnecessary, and the teleport just feels a bit clunky when trying to use it in tandem with the range power. This is only made worse because Jason is going to be smack dab in between two other range killers, which are far more interesting, that being the Judgment and Vecna Stranger Things. But that's all I have to say. We're gonna skip ahead a little bit to the endgame now. Game 9 ends when I go ahead and close hatch to go ahead and start the endgame collapse, which, if you remember, Jason is really good at this, since he can simply stay in power for the entire time and patrol the generators quickly. Despite this, the Sable still decided to waste nearly 2 minutes of my time. So I finally go ahead and kill her and Mori her to put an end to this nearly 13-minute game, where I killed the first 2 survivors in the first 6 minutes. Game 10 really just kinda came down to this. This game really did come down to the wire, however, I did luckily manage to clutch out a victory by managing to finally find a kill on the Ji-Woo, and somehow speedrunning this Fang Min from 0 hooks to death. At which point I go ahead and claim my final hook on the Fang Min and manage to catch out the Ada, who was just randomly sabotaging hooks for no reason. At which point I find and close hatch and manage to locate the final survivor and mori them for a clean 4K. Game 11 would take place on the Sanctum of Wrath and showcases the final build I used for this challenge, that being a combination of the Deputy Badge build and the Iridescent Boater build I've been using it throughout this challenge so far. Basically, Dissolution, Ruin, Thrill of the Hunt, Undying, with Iridescent Motor, and Deputy Badge. After the chase with the Renato, I try to get the Sable, only to get hit with a re-zero moment, and decide to just try and tunnel out the Renato as fast as I possibly can so I can secure the win. Luckily, that was made very easily as he runs directly back into me. Luckily, I would get the run back, utilizing Iridescent Boat Motor to block off the window, and teleporting to the pallet made it very easily to corral the Sable into a nice clean shot. After getting hit with a very skillful spear on my end, she goes ahead and immediately pre-drops the pallet to get a little bit of extra distance. While this does delay the chase a little bit, it only does it for a short moment as I'm able to immediately down her with an M1 shortly after. Shortly after hooking the Sable, I managed to find Gabriel hanging out on this back generator, which unfortunately doesn't have any closer teleport than that window there, but luckily doesn't have anything closer than that back window there, so I'm able to down him fairly easily. With 2 people on hook, I managed to find the Renato, who seems like a fairly easy kill as he does not take the window there, and I'm able to M1 him. However, he hits me with a surprise dead hard, to which I try to follow up with a follow-up spike, to which I end up holding this out for far longer than I should have before firing, which gives him a ton of distance on me. However, he does go down fairly shortly after as he drops the pallet on the wrong side, opening me up to Mori him and continue the match. And while this Mori plays out, I feel like I should probably explain that I did bring a Mori for the final 3 matches so that they're a bit more cinematic, and that I would be going into far more depth for each match than I previously had, but I feel like that was already apparent from the several past chases. Regardless, entering Omnipresent Evil, I managed to find Sable hiding in this locker, and I'm able to simply block off the window and break this pallet, so even if she did jump out of the locker, she would have nowhere to go. But she didn't hop out of the locker, so I'm able to just hook her for free. Not even 3 seconds after I hook the Sable, I managed to find the Lara Croft, who tries to pre-drop and then unhook her right in front of me. To which I just immediately down her and hit the Sable as collateral damage. To which Sable just gives up, and I'm able to down and Mori her for free without having to worry about Decisive Strike, while Gabriel picks up the Lara behind me. There's some back and forth as the Gabriel saves the Lara from hook, to which I'm able to simply 2-tap her with an M1 to get rid of her endurance, and then hook her with a Spike 3 not even a second later. Finally, I'm able to end off this match by finding Gabriel standing still in Omnipresent Evil, teleporting right in front of him and hitting with an M1. I said hit him with an M1, thank you. And as he goes to try and pick up the Lara from the hook by going around this giant rock, I'm simply able to cut him off and down him before he can get the unhook, finishing off the match with a Mori and a glorious 4K. Alright, I know Game 11 was a really long one, but Game 12 is going to go by much quicker. Sending us to the Gideon's meat plant, we managed to do one of the most Jason shit ever and break down a wall right in front of this Ji-Woo and managed to hit him for free. This leads to me pretty much being able to just walk him down to death, and downing him not that much after. Alright, fast forwarding a bit into the match, I managed to get Ji-Woo on Death Hook and find him again on this generator. However, due to how Jason's teleport works, I can only teleport to a pallet, and had Ji-Woo dodged this spike and continue going for the pallet, he would have actually made it. But I'm able to tag him down here. But that's not the problem. I go ahead and loop back around again and force dissolution value, but he has life, so he's able to get away scot-free and make it to the other pallet. The issue with Jason's teleport on a map like Gideon's is that teleporting to different pallets is that survivors can just kind of run out in the open for free. As you can see here, I literally cannot catch the Ji-Woo because there's nowhere for me to teleport to except for this lone pallet here. However, as shown earlier, I managed to catch the Ji-Woo off guard, but had he simply gone around the loop like regular, he would have made the pallet anyway. So there's not much I could have done in that situation. Unfortunately, fast forwarding again, I managed to find the Ji-Woo, but it's at the last generator left, and the Renato is able to complete the generator in front of my face, and is able to do so scot-free because they had adrenaline. Luckily, I do manage to find the Ace Visconti shortly after and quickly down him, leading to me to at least get 1 kill, but unfortunately the other survivors are able to escape for scot-free. Unfortunately, this match showcased something very important for me to learn. Jason just gets hard countered by exhaustion perks like Sprint Burst and Life, especially if they're used correctly. Oftentimes it felt like there was literally nothing I could do to counter what the survivors were doing, even though I knew what perks they had outside of just hope they fucked up. And that's a terrible feeling, especially considering the state of Dead by Daylight, but that's just kind of how the game is at this point. If you don't bring something to counter exhaustion perks, just be expected to lose. For Game 13, we load into Larry's Memorial Institute for the final match of this challenge. So if you've made it this far, I would like to thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And clearly, you enjoy this video since you've been watching this for nearly 30 minutes now. That being said, I'm going to let this match play out in its entirety while I go over some statistics I collected over the course of this challenge. Over the course of 13 matches, I ended up with a total of 33 kills and a total kill rate of 75%, averaging about 3 out of 4 kills every game. My total playtime with Jason ended up to be around 2 hours and 45 minutes. Out of the 172 survivor perks available, only 67 of these perks were actually seen used in-game, totaling to around 37.8% of the total perks used by the survivors. The most commonly seen perk was tied between 16 appearances between both Sprint Burst and Live. Followed in second place was Windows of Opportunity at 14 appearances, and followed again in third place was yet another tie between Resilience and Deja Vu, both of which sat at 10 appearances. Over these 13 matches of Jason, I learned quite a lot. I learned what perks were good with him, what perks were bad with him, and I learned the general ins and outs of how to play Jason. He's a killer who excels greatly at ambushing survivors and closing out chases quickly, but can struggle to close out chases if he does not get that initial drop on survivors. Because of this, I find perks like Dissolution to be extremely powerful on Jason, since it means that even if he fails to get that initial ambush, he'll still be able to close out chase, even if there isn't a scrap pile or hook nearby for him to reload at. Additionally, I found that running some form of anti-exhaustion perk is going to be absolutely crucial on Jason, just due to how much perks like Live and Sprint Burst can hurt him. Without these sort of things, whether it be his blue add-on the Sauna Rock or something like Mindbreaker, Jason can struggle extremely against survivors with exhaustion perks, as more often than not, they will never be caught off guard and will almost always make it to a safe pallet or window before Jason can get that initial ambush. That being said, I will leave you all with the rest of the game, free of my yapping. And if you've made it this far, I hope I'll see you all next time. Cheerio.
Ah!